Hey everyone, this is George Couros, and this is the little series I've been doing. I'm just doing 3 episodes based on stories from failure that I've had in my life. And I don't know if I would say they're failure because they all in some way turned out better than what I expected. But at the time, it felt like I'd maybe done something wrong, something had screwed up, and my life would be worse off. But actually ended up, working out way better than I could have ever expected. And last week when I talked about this, I shared a story about my first interview when I was applying for a kindergarten position and ended up teaching high school technology, which I didn't want, but totally changed the trajectory of my career. Actually, not getting the job I wanted led to something so much better. And this week, I want to share a story on basically sometimes when you say no to an opportunity, you're really saying yes to yourself. And that actually long-term is what is really beneficial. So I wanted to share that with you because I know a lot of you are, maybe looking at new opportunities, looking at new jobs, maybe education, outside of education, but you really have to think about, is this actually going to serve you long-term or is this going to make things worse? And sometimes it doesn't mean that we don't do hard things, that we don't, take opportunities that are really challenging. But we also have to think, am I actually put in a position where I'll be more successful because of this opportunity than if I didn't take it? And I want to share a story about my first opportunity to become a principal. I actually had become an assistant principal, and I was so blessed to have an incredible principal. His name was Archie Lilico, and he is absolutely still a good friend of mine to this day, brilliant leader. And I remember actually the first time I met him was in an interview to be his assistant principal. He was new to the school as principal. I was, never really considered being administrator. And he really challenged me and pushed me. And we actually ended up fighting in the interview. I talk about this and what makes a great principal. And I thought it was the worst interview I had ever had by far. And I didn't expect a job, but then a couple of days later, he actually called me and offered me the opportunity, and I was shocked. And I said, well, I didn't think we really got along. He said, well, you challenged me, and that's what I wanted. And no one else was willing to do that. And I'm actually looking for someone who pushes my thinking and will not let me go out to the staff and actually do something they think is dumb. Now, if you challenge me, that's okay. But sometimes I'm gonna have to make a decision you might not agree with. You got to back me up. And so he really taught me on the importance of really having, diverse thinking and diverse voices and really challenging things and not thinking all the same. And I actually, when I went to become a principal, the first person I looked at hiring was someone who was a teacher on staff who always challenged me. She was like almost combative, but she always had best interests of kids. I think as long as you have a common goal, but you have different ways of getting there, you might see perspectives that you didn't get. And Archie really taught me that. And when I became an assistant principal, I had no interest in becoming an assistant principal. And maybe 1 or 2 days later, I was like, I want to be a principal one day. Like, I just loved it. And it was because I saw how Archie was and just how he had such ownership. He was so empowering to staff. He saw it as a really servant role. He reminded me a lot of my parents in a restaurant, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but he was so about everybody else and making them to be successful. And I think that's something in leadership that it's really okay to have an ego, but it depends what your ego serves. If your ego is all about you in leadership and you being the best, that actually a long term is going to hurt you. But in reality, if your ego is about, I want to be the best leader I can, to do that, I actually have to make other people do better, then you can feed your ego while people succeed. Because that's the role of leadership, not administrator, but leadership. And so I really wanted to, become an assistant principal, a principal. And so I was kind of being, groomed for that. Archie had his mentality is like, you're not meant to be here for a couple of years. Assistant principals should go on to principal roles. And this is kind of like your internship through this process. So we did this. And about a year and a half later, there was a principal pool in my district, and I applied for it. And I was really hoping, I got tapped on the shoulder by my superintendent. She really wanted me to apply, and she knew I wanted to be a principal as well. So I was approved, but it wasn't for a job. It was to actually just, to be available if a position opened up. And so about 2-3 weeks or later, she contacted me and said, hey, I'd love to talk to you. And she called me down to her office. And I went there. I was really excited. I was nervous about it. And she said, I want to offer you this job. but it is pretty far away from where we live. It's in the district, and the district was huge, like geographically huge. And it's a smaller school. You won't have an assistant principal. You'll be on your own. And to be honest, yeah, I was okay with that. I was okay with that part. The part I was struggling with was the distance, that I would either have to move from where I lived to a very small town. And, you know, I was in my early 30s. I didn't want to live in a small town at that time. I had spent a lot of time in small towns in, you know, growing up, first couple of years of my teaching. And, you know, it was not really for me at that time. But I could work in a small town, but I don't know if I could live there. So it was either you're going to have to drive 75 minutes minimum every day if the weather's nice. It could be way worse, and especially this is in Canada. So I was excited about the opportunity to work with that school, not the drive, not the massive change that would happen in my life. And when I talk about that, something you might not know about me, I actually used to be a spin instructor while I was assistant principal and a principal. And I would do it first thing in the morning. So basically, I would show up at the gym, 6 o'clock, go from 6 to 6:45, yell at people, get a big sweat on, you know, really get some physical activity. And I was so calm when I was principal because I got all my tension and anxiety out first thing in the morning. And I knew as assistant principal, it really benefited me. It was something that I just felt some confidence in the morning. I felt, you know, I still exercise first thing in the morning to this day. And I know I'm so much better when I do this. And all of a sudden, I'm looking at this job and, you know, this opportunity that, you know, I wasn't going to become a professional spin instructor. I wasn't going to be like, you know, on the Peloton team or anything like that. It was the concern that I would actually not be able to teach that class because I live in this town that was totally different and I'd have to give up some of those things in my life at that time. And it was the concern that I just wouldn't be the best for the staff if I couldn't do these things that accelerate me outside of school. Sometimes we look at, you know, our work and our personal life as totally separate things, but I believe they kind of build on each other, that if I can find some joy, some happiness in my personal life, that it actually sets me up better to be professional and vice versa. They do serve each other. So I was really struggling with this. I was struggling with the idea that, is this, if I say no, am I going to not get an opportunity? Am I going to seem like I'm not a team player, that I'm not willing to do hard things? And she gave me a few days to think about it. I remember talking to Archie about it. And he basically said, do you love being assistant principal here? I'm like, it's awesome. I love this community. I love this job. I love working with you. And he said, okay, so worst case scenario, if you say no to this job, you might be stuck here for a while at a job you love. And I was like, it's true. That's not a bad point. And he said, but you might go out there and you're probably going to hate it not because of the job, but because of all the things that you have to give up in your personal life to be able to do this job. And like, why do we work, right? Why do we work? And I think there's obviously for me, there's some purpose. You know, I love the work that I do, but it is to live, right? And that to me was something I really thought about. So he kind of coached me to say no to this opportunity, no, thinking I might not ever get an opportunity to be principal if I said no at this time. So fast forward to the second meeting with my superintendent, and I was very terrified of saying no. She was going to just think poorly of me. But I explained my reasoning, and that I didn't think if I gave up certain things in my personal life that I would be able to most effectively serve in that role. Now, there's other ways I could have maybe done it, but I feel like that was really that morning session to teach that class, to find that in the morning, I always felt it really set me up for success, and I'd have to give it up. And she understood it. And she said, well, hopefully another opportunity comes up. And it was like, kind of, you know, when you hear that, you're like, yeah, this is never coming up. So I almost gave up. And probably about a month and a half later, another opportunity came up, and it actually ended up being just the best school. I loved it. It was amazing. It was close to where I lived. It was not as close as where I was working, but it was manageable, that I could still do a lot of things I was doing at that time that would help me with that community and totally just change my career. So the reason I share this with you all is sometimes when you say no to a new opportunity, what you are ultimately doing is saying yes to yourself. It's okay to say no to others if it actually is going to benefit you long term to say no to that opportunity. I felt if I said yes, just for this, and this is like, we are so guilty of this in education. We will say yes to everybody else except for our families, our friends, and ourselves. But we will give everything till there's nothing left to give. And you'll kind of get some feedback on that on next week's episode. But I wanted to share that with you because I think sometimes we feel like we have to. I don't really believe you can have it all. I just don't believe that, because just something has to go. But I think you can have most of it, right? I think you can have a lot of good things, and you shouldn't really have to sacrifice yourself for a job, because here's the deal. When you die, your job's not coming to your funeral, right? But if you give everything to your job, some of the people you care most about might not show up either. I think that's something I think about all the time. So I just want to share that, another lesson from failure. I hope you got some ideas from this, but I'd love to hear from you, your comments, anything you think about. Thanks for being here. I'm going to share another lesson next week. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.